spoiled rich kids are traveling the world to volunteer in poor countries. Wow, sounds noble, right? But the reality? Instead of helping them, these spoiled rich kids often end up inadvertently destroying these poor communities, all so they can feel better about themselves. Let me explain.
You're being sold is the idea that you'll help a community. What you're really buying is an opportunity to help yourself. I wanted to physically go out to be that change, make a difference, be a global citizen. I definitely was thinking about how it would look when I applied to college and how it would look on my resume.
So you're a tourism company and you want to make more money. The problem is tourism taking vacations is often viewed as a nice to have. It would be nice if I blew a bunch of money on a vacation, but I don't need to. So if you want to make more money as a tourism company, you need to find a way to turn this nice to have into a must have. I have to pay thousands of dollars for this trip. But how do you do that? Enter voluntourism, offering rich kids the opportunity to travel to poor countries to volunteer. You could be planting trees in Brazil, teaching kids English in Kenya, cleaning up beaches in Bali, or even building houses for poor families in the Philippines. That way, not only do you get to travel to exciting faraway places, but you also get to do so with a clean conscience, without feeling like you're this rich, out-of-touch Westerner exploiting poor people. Think of it as selling an all-inclusive dose of self-righteousness, all for the small price of a few $1,000s. And boom, now that's a business model. On top of that, what's great about the voluntourism model is that the moment people hear volunteering, it automatically conjures up images of selfless people working tirelessly to make the world a better place. When in reality, using the guise of volunteer work and charity is a great way to take people's money and divert it into your own pocket. That's exactly why the volunteer tourism business has become one of the most profitable and shady sectors of the travel industry, bringing in $3 billion yearly from millions of affluent travelers who are none the wiser. And every year, it's only getting more and more popular. And that would be fine if the voluntourism industry was actually making the positive impact it claims, when in reality, the billion-dollar voluntourism industry is actually an unregulated nightmare that's destroying the local communities it's supposed to be serving with every volunteer tourist it puts on the ground. Stay dangerous, and this is the billion-dollar business of voluntourism. Although I will never be able to travel to China, by the time you're watching this, I'll actually be taking my parents on a trip back to Vietnam. They're finally retired and haven't been back in decades. I haven't been back since I was a little kid, so this is a really meaningful trip for us that you guys helped make possible. We've really come full circle from immigrating to America dirt poor to where I'm at now, so I wanted to treat them with this trip. And I highly recommend you guys keep working super hard so you too can support your parents as well. It is extremely rewarding. We'll also be traveling to other Southeast Asian countries while we're out there, like Indonesia, but the problem is I don't know any Indonesian. But luckily, that is where Babbel comes in. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the entire world, and what I love about Babbel is that they get straight to teaching you practical stuff that you would actually need to say in real life. And one of the languages they offer is Indonesian. Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat siang.
Selamat siang.
Selamat siang.
Babbel's lessons are designed by real language teachers, and their methods are so effective that Babbel is scientifically proven by academics from places like Yale University to help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, with just a few minutes a day. Over 10 million people have already used Babbel, and they even offer a 20-day money-back guarantee. Learning a new language is also great for impressing girls or a potential business client, wink wink. So what are you waiting for? Make 2023 the year you learn a new language and get 60% off your Babbel subscription by clicking the link below. So pause the video and click the link below right now for 60% off your Babbel subscription. Thanks to Babbel for sponsoring this video. It's probably hard to imagine volunteering abroad as being a bad thing. But there's a big difference between volunteering in the traditional sense and the twisted world of voluntourism. Back in the day, volunteers would actually have to commit to years of service with organizations like the Peace Corps. That way, they would get the training and experience needed to do things like teach English effectively or give medical care in poor communities. These real volunteers have to literally drop everything in their lives to dedicate their entire existence to volunteering. They do this because they're actually doing good, and it's incredibly rewarding for them. The only problem is only a tiny handful of people are willing to go to this extreme. However, everyone wants to feel that same feeling of contribution, everyone wants to feel that same sense of purpose even if temporary, so that is what you want to sell. You get to experience all the same fuzzy feelings a real Peace Corps volunteer gets, but without all the hard work, without all the dedication. Just do it for a week or a month and boom, you're in and out of that third world hellhole and you're back into your cushy life, with the Instagram pictures with poor colored kids to prove it. Volunteer tourists get to pick a fun, rewarding activity that they're told will improve the country they're visiting, like teaching kids in a Tanzanian city for $1,800, or working in an animal shelter in the Amazon for almost $3,000, or doing ocean conservation in South Africa for the bargain price of $3,200. Without having to do any training, undergo any background checks, or needing any special skills to participate. But what they do need is money. Volunteerism trips come with a pretty hefty price tag of anywhere from $1,000 to $7,000 depending on the experience. And where is all this money going? Well, almost none of it goes to these struggling communities that these programs are supposed to be helping. In one popular volunteerism program, only $9 per week of that multi-$1,000 fee went back into helping the community. And the rest of that money is going right into the volunteerism company's pockets. Like in 2010 when Projects Abroad, one of the biggest volunteerism companies out there, made over $3 million in profit, $1 million of which went to the company's 2 directors. Think about it, that is how genius this business model is. Rich kids and their parents are literally paying you thousands upon thousands of dollars to go to a third world country to do manual labor. Aside from the transportation costs, there are literally no overhead expenses to this business. Just drop them off, pick them back up, and boom, you just made a few $1,000s per volunteer. Volunteerism is not philanthropy. It is a business and a very clever business at that. And all that money is just one of the problems with the volunteerism industry. So let's say you're a kid, you've got affluent parents, and you have them book a volunteerism trip for you. You want to help people around the world in the most hands-on way possible, and plus making your resume look a little better is a nice bonus. What's the problem with this? Why is it so bad? It's because once the volunteerism company gets daddy's money, there's no incentive to actually help the community. The only incentive is to make you feel like you're helping, to make you feel like you're giving back to the people, so that you go home and brag about it to all your friends so they sign up too. Which is why volunteerism often leaves these places a lot worse off than how they found it. Most of the projects that volunteers work on are very serious and require special training, like taking care of kids who have endured serious trauma, or constructing homes or structures that are supposed to last a lifetime. These young, inexperienced volunteers simply don't have the skills needed to get these jobs done properly. But fear not. Just have these kids lay down some bricks or whatever so they feel good, and when they inevitably mess up, the local people will just have to work twice as hard to redo all their work. Simple, right? You take all the money, and the locals end up having to do even more labor.
The primary goal of our time at the orphanage was to build a library. We believed that we'd be able to build the whole thing while we were there until you realize that none of us had ever done any construction work. I realized that they were taking apart what we'd done and redoing it, and then they'd let it set. And by the time that we would show up to work in a few more hours, we'd be none the wiser. I told one of the chaperones from my school on the trip about what I'd seen and was advised to keep it to myself.
And when the locals aren't redoing their work, their jobs are being taken away by these volunteers.
The thing is, I have never done any teaching.
Yeah, I understand. So you can try the simple here because I have the book you can read.
The fact of the matter is, it would have been way more useful if these volunteerists would have just simply given the money they paid to the volunteerism company to the actual locals. That $2,000 that tourists pay for a volunteer vacation would pay the salary of an experienced village teacher for 4 months. But there's nothing heartwarming or exciting about just donating money, which is why millions of people still opt to spend thousands of dollars on volunteer vacations instead. And what's the biggest demographic of people that these unqualified volunteers are working with? Extremely vulnerable children in orphanages.
"500 children normally live at the Don Bosco Center."
One of the most popular places volunteers go to are orphanages. Although orphanages are no longer a thing in places like America, in places like Nepal, Kenya, Ghana, Cambodia, Tanzania, and South Africa, there are orphanages all over the place. And orphanage volunteerism is a huge business. Volunteer tourists think who better to help than poor children without parents.
Most volunteers also arrive via an increasingly commercialized system, and before leaving home, it's worth investigating who really stands to profit from their presence.
But the thing is, a lot of the kids living in these orphanages aren't orphans at all. Over 80% of children in orphanages around the world have at least one living parent according to the US State Department. Most are placed in orphanages because their families are too poor to take care of them. Quote, child finders go into communities and are paid $50 to $100 to identify needy families, end quotes. These struggling parents are promised that their kids will get food and a good education. But what really ends up happening is that these kids are being placed in orphanages so that the orphanage directors can make money from volunteer tourists who want to take care of these needy kids. In these orphanages, when there are no volunteers around, these children are subjected to a painful, scary, and institutionalized upbringing where they serve as one of the country's top tourist attractions. Just look at Nepal. Over 90% of the orphanages in the country are located right in the top tourist districts. Convenient, right? Or Cambodia. While the rest of the world is reducing the number of orphanages, the number of them in Cambodia has doubled. And with every new orphanages comes more money from volunteer tourists.
Just now, a group of Canadians are visiting. In their downtime, the students get to play with the children.
Once a child is poached to live in an orphanage, they are completely anonymous. No identification, no birth certificate, nothing. Nobody has any idea who they are, so it's virtually impossible to find their family ever again. They are left completely alone. Inside these orphanages, directors try to keep the conditions as terrible as possible. That way, volunteers see just how awful it is, which makes them want to give even more money. The more malnourished, helpless, and dirty the children are, the better it is for the orphanage directors.
If they see kids sleeping on a good bed with a good mattress, they won't donate money for better beds and better mattresses.
Even though they're actually hurting children for profit, orphanages like these still attract hundreds of millions of dollars every year in foreign donations. Orphanages are the perfect place to take volunteers because it tugs on their heartstrings. There's nothing quite as emotionally rewarding as a bunch of little kids running towards you with joy.
As Canadians and orphans grow closer, not just goodwill, but a lot of money is flowing into the orphanages too.
But what's actually happening is that each of these volunteers becomes just another person who enters these kids' lives for a week and then leaves forever. It's emotionally devastating. Not to mention that the volunteers aren't vetted in any way.
This is the very high risk for Cambodian children who are living in the orphanage. This guy, he's American guys, and he came to Cambodia through the project abroad.
All they have to do is pay a fee, and they have full access to hundreds of vulnerable children who don't have any identity or anyone who truly cares about them.
This is just a complete joke. We've been totally abandoned. We're meant to have a timetable that we're sticking to. But instead we're kind of just left. There's no lunch, there are no drinks. The kids have got nothing to do. And our teaching was totally pointless.
So this ends up creating some really disturbing situations. So if orphanages are so detrimental to kids, why are there more and more of these institutions popping up every year? The answer? Demand. The demand from hungry volunteers who want to make a difference. The business of volunteerism is poetically ironic. An industry that promises to bring much needed aid to struggling communities is actually just a giant business that prioritizes wealthy volunteers while intentionally keeping these places in poverty. There's no oversight as to where the billions of dollars are going. No one is looking into potential volunteers to see if they're a threat to the vulnerable communities they're entering. And the bigger the volunteerism industry becomes, the more difficult it is for these at-risk communities to be self-reliant, which is exactly what the volunteerism industry wants. It's not about providing these places with the help they need to get out of poverty. It's about keeping them in poverty, so you can send in more and more volunteers every year, each paying a hefty fee. Volunteerism is completely reliant on these de facto slaves staying slaves. And guess what? Pretty much every other successful government and corporation are also reliant on slave labor. Learn about this dark secret of the world by watching our video with the link below.